Firstly, I'm Michele Mackenzie. I'm a principal analyst with Analysis Mason, and I cover the IoT market. I'm the lead analyst on our IoT services program. So I'm going to start by asking each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and if we can start with Michael.
Hi, thank you. Good morning, I'm Michael Wheeler. I head up our global internet backbone business unit for NTT. We run a global network that spans 5 continents, and we have connectivity kind of throughout the world and provide services to a lot of players in the IoT space, as well as on the internet, like ISP and telco side.
Thank you. Andrew?
Hi, I'm Andrew McGrath from Vodafone. I am responsible for part of our carrier services business, which is selling access circuits and international capacity around the globe and purchasing them in the countries where we don't have our own network. In terms of IoT, in that capacity, it's particularly just making sure that my area is never an impediment to IoT. That's the key thing.
Okay. And Mehmet.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Mehmet Toros. I'm heading to TURK Telecom International, which is the international arm of the TURK Telecom parent company. So we are based in the lovely city Budapest in Hungary. Actually, we are doing wholesale and international carrier business, as well as the enterprise business in some of the Eastern European countries.
Thank you. Okay, well, just a little bit of context. So there's been a great deal of, some might call it hype, around IoT over the last few years. You know, there are predictions around 50 billion or 20 billion connections, depending on which, what you read and which analyst houses you look at. With Analysis Mason, we are predicting good growth in IoT. So for cellular, narrowband IoT, and LTE-M, cellular I'm including there 2G, 4G, 5G in the future. You know, we're predicting over 5 billion connections by 2026. So those are connections that generate a connectivity revenue. We don't include in our forecast all of the other sort of short-range connections and so on. And so what I'd like to understand from our panelists a little bit is how you see the growth of the IoT business, any indications you can give on how big it is now and how big you expect it to grow over the next few years, and you know, how significant it is for your business. So should we start with Michael?
Sure. So I think ultimately IoT is still in its earliest stages of development and kind of applications especially. We would probably look at it a few different ways in regards to projections around what the scale will be. Certainly from just a pure bandwidth point of view, it's very small in relative terms today. Part of that, though, is I think because the bandwidth volumes that exist now are fairly different than they were maybe 10 years ago, prior to particularly video streaming being a big part of the traffic that's traversing the internet. So that, I think the impact won't be a surge or a spike. I think you'll see that in particular parts of the world times, maybe around particular events, as well as around particular applications that are being used, and you know, releases of new IoT capabilities and those kinds of things. But in relative terms to the overall traffic volumes, it's not going to be huge, at least in our minds. So certainly the network, at the broadest level, can sustain the traffic volumes to be seeing and grow kind of in an iterative basis going forward. The thing that I think we're probably the most interested in seeing is the number of devices that are connected. And depending upon whose forecast you look at, somewhere between 4 and 6 devices per person in the world are kind of being predicted to be connected within the next couple of years. Really, I think 2020 is the number I saw. So, I mean, ultimately, that creates a whole different set of challenges in many ways in regards to how do we manage an internet backbone at a global level that has that kind of connectivity associated with it in regards to the sheer devices. Yeah. Some of the devices being smart devices and some of them being dumb devices. It creates a lot of new challenges.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And Andrew?
Well, so Vodafone is a kind of market leader at this early stage in IoT devices. So we have, as an organization, over 70 million devices connected right now, and Gartner, if it's not a dirty word in current company, they rate us as #1 in the industry. And that's both for breadth of vision and ability to implement. So it's those things that we are hoping and working hard to ensure that we sustain our #1 position going forward. In terms of today, our 74 million connections, we connect everything from Kindles to cows even. But we are particularly big in automotive, where we have over 14 million cars already connected, particularly the European manufacturers there, but also things like smart devices. It's really early days, 70-odd million connections, when your projection of 5 billion in a few years' time, that's probably at the lower end of some of the projections. But whatever it is, it's going to be a vast number. And I think, maybe just to tee up some of the things that might come out later, is if we are to sustain our position as a market leader in the industry, it's going to be managing a huge number of devices, and it's going to be collaboration in the industry. And just to bring it back to the kind of carrier market, I think that collaboration is in the DNA of the carrier community, and it's going to be really important for IoT to achieve that growth.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And Mehmet?
Actually, this is, the IoT has already knocked the door. So it is in our life, actually. So in Turkey, I would like to give an example in Turkey. So there is an initiative in order to manufacture the electric car in Turkey. And some of the participants has get together in order to establish a consortium to produce this car. But this is not the driverless car, but the fully controlled and monitored by the IoT devices. So one of the biggest mobile operator in Turkey, which is Turkcell, so is in that consortium. It means that this automated car will be monitored and controlled throughout the 5G or 4G or any other wireless environment. Mm-hmm. So most probably it's going to be realized at the end of next year, most probably. So on the other hand, so the TURK Telekom has got some smart city application in Turkey. So this is we are approaching to that part of the world as TURK Telekom International. So we have our own network in Eastern Europe and in Turkey as well. So we are approaching to our enterprise and the corporate customers in order to provide the huge bandwidth to fulfill their requirements.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So it seems that, two of you have mentioned automotive, and that is probably, one of the applications at the moment that's better understood, and there's, a roadmap for how we see that developing. But in terms of this, and we seem to have agreed that there probably won't be a big data explosion, but a gradual increase over the next few years. Are there any other application groups which you see as, potentially fueling that data growth?
I think home applications have become very prevalent, and again, back to the kind of concept of the dumb devices, have also created some challenges. So we were talking about nanny cams, or home security systems, Nest temperature control systems. Those have become fairly prolific, and we're a part of some of the security challenges that we've seen from an overall network perspective related to IoT within even the last couple of years. So I think that, home automation or home connectivity, I think in general terms, is a fairly big category as well.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because a lot of the applications that we hear about, they could be high volume in terms of, for example, utilities. You've mentioned home. Home may be an obvious one where you can see, more consumption of data. But, utilities, for example, we hear that, it could be sort of one message a month or, very small volumes of data. Mehmet and Andrew, any thoughts on that?
Actually, I would like to share some of the some of the information. I mean, the numbers, but it's really, in fact, we will remind it. The internet has 4.5 billion users around the world at the moment. 3.8 billion smartphones are in use, and 9 billion devices are connected to Wi-Fi. So the world population is about 7 billion in the world. So it means that 9 billion devices are connected to the internet throughout the Wi-Fi networks or the 5G networks. As Michael mentioned about the devices at home, most probably more than 5 or around 5. I don't know how many devices I have to connect it to internet. I don't count at the moment. Most probably around 10. Actually, there during the ITW, at the beginning of the ITW in early this year, so we had a chance to see Sophia. She is the social humanity robot. Mm-hmm. She, as far as I remember, that she has more than 50 facial, exposures and the facial mimics, and also she can answer all of your questions mostly. Mm-hmm. So this is one of the example of the robotics, and of course there are another applications like robots we hear and we see on the TV or on the internet news. So the year after a year.
Yeah.
So these are the applications.
There's lots of innovation taking place and so on, but in terms of, I suppose the application groups that will be driving the traffic growth in the near term or medium term, let's say, I think we sort of agree it's more automotive, possibly some of the and the home area. Okay. I just wanted to say to the audience, you please feel free to send in your questions. I'm keeping an eye on the screen here, so if you do have any questions, please let us know, and we can ask the panelists. Now, in terms of, I'll move on to my next question, as we haven't got any yet from the audience. I wanted to ask now, and maybe we could start at the other end with Mehmet, in terms of what new initiatives you have in the pipeline to address the IoT opportunity. So I'm thinking here in terms of new networks, new network capabilities, and so on.
Actually, we are in a study to expand our networks in all of the Europe and mostly in the Eastern Europe. So as a carrier and wholesale operator. So we have to upgrade our systems from the capacity point of view and the system point of view. So SD1 and the SDN NFV network. So we have to consider, and also we have some preparations to switch our systems to the SD1. Actually, this is necessary for all of the wholesale operators or the network operators, in fact. So as the parent company, which is TURK Telekom, has got a lot of works on the IoT to preparation in order to timeline, in order to timely manner to be prepared. So that's why. So we are working together with the vendors and also to other network operators as well.
Yeah, to ensure everything in place. Okay. Andrew?
And for us, it's in Vodafone, it's about investing in access technologies to ensure that they are not an impediment to IoT. We really believe in the growth of IoT, so it's investment on a number of fronts, like narrowband to support the mass adoption of low-powered devices and to have a technology that can create reach within an area, so deep into cellars or cabinets under stairs for meters and that sort of thing. So it's access technology. And at the other end, it's 5G, so you can have very high bandwidth capabilities and move into more high-definition surveillance or entertainment type services as well. So it's access technologies like that, making sure it's not an impediment. But the other thing is important is to invest in the platforms that we've got to support innovation by the whole industry. You know, Vodafone is big in automotive, as I've suggested, both working with the car manufacturers and insurance organizations that have innovative models on insurance that might be influenced by the style of driving or where you drive, the time of day, that sort of thing. So, but we're not going to be investing in all sectors. You know, it's a massive market, so therefore it's important that our platform is available to support innovation from the industry. And that's making it easy for organizations that could be, you know, tiny innovative organizations to adopt things like device management, connectivity management, subscriber management, and have end-to-end security capabilities. So not only does an entrepreneurial organization have a great idea, they have the ability both to get it launched into the market, but then it doesn't create a monster afterwards. You know, they can manage that number of devices and provide a great service after it's launched. So it's investment across the platform to enable IoT as well.
Okay, good. Yeah, thank you. And Michael?
Yeah, I would actually jump off on one of the points that Andrew mentioned earlier. I think that the idea of collaboration within the industry is very critical to the whole space for IoT. I think one of the differences that we believe that IoT will have in the overall network compared to video. Video, especially after its first year or two of kind of large-scale adoption, moved to a lot of caching of content and storage of content at the edge, and so that user experience was as effective as it could be, which makes all kinds of sense. In the case of IoT, a lot of it is about user engagement, and it's not necessarily going to be cacheable interactions, whether they're just data-driven interactions or even video. If I get an alert on my phone because my Amazon Cloud Cam in the front of my house saw a bear walk across the front yard last night, when I go to look at that, I can look at the cached, you know, video, but if I want to look at a live video feed, that's not a cacheable environment. I've got to be able to have a good connection on my mobile phone here in London, touristing, whatever, you know, series of ISPs and networks it does to get to my carrier in my house in Seattle, and allow me to be able to see that in real time. And I think that's a fairly big difference. And as we see more and more of the applications and devices themselves deployed, that will have, I think, a bigger impact over time on the network, because you can't just utilize cached or stored environment just right at the edge. You have to be able to really look at delivering that service and having that user experience be positive at a global level, not just at a kind of local, regionalized level.
Yeah, good point.
Michele,
Okay, so
may I add something into my colleagues' statement? So this is an ecosystem. So as a single operator like Vodafone or Entity or TURK Telecom or the others cannot do real IoT explanation examples. So this is the ecosystem together with the vendors, operators, and the manufacturers, software, production companies, and the user experience, and probably the other elements are surrounded by the ecosystems.
Yeah.
So we have to cooperate with each other. We have to cooperate to the other members of the ecosystem.
Yeah. Okay, that's a valid point, and I'll come back to that actually.
Okay.
But we've just had a question from the audience. So there's a big push for data center operators to move closer and closer to the edge to support IoT applications. How do you see your company aligning to that? So we've already touched upon it a bit. I don't know who wants to go first here. Andrew, would you like to take that to start with? Or?
Yeah, we work with a lot of the data center organizations, and it's true, they are wanting to invest closer to the edge. And I think that I refer back to the comment about the DNA of the carrier community is about that sort of cooperation, and so we enable that right across the globe. We're keen to do it with these data centers if it means it works better for the customer, great. If it means that if we can work with them to invest nearer to the Vodafone edge, things will work better on Vodafone's network than they will on someone else's. So, we're keen to support that sort of initiative.
Good. Anything to add there, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Andrew's point. I think that ultimately, I think a lot of it will be driven by the applications and how those are being utilized by whether it's residential users and/or enterprise types of users, and I think that will determine ultimately. To be quite honest, I think it comes down to the economics of edge is a very opaque term in regards to what does that mean, and how how is that defined by each individual company and/or the application they're supporting. So, but in general terms, from a network point of view, we want to be in the places, in the data centers, in the markets where there's a larger need for bandwidth, and so that certainly is going to be a place that we would continue to kind of expand our network where the opportunities present themselves.
Okay, good. And Mehmet, anything to add on that?
In fact, you have to get more closer and closer to the market and your end users in order to offer the available products of the IoT or whatever you have. So that's why the data centers and the some caching service are really important for the providers. So without having the feedback from your customers, so it cannot react in timely manner. So that's why the data center operations and the data center location is quite important for these applications, of course.
Yeah. Okay. Good. We've had another question in as well, so I'll go to the audience questions first before continuing with mine. So as a carrier, what is your strategy around enabling IoT solutions directly to consumers and businesses versus enabling the application or service providers? So a little bit around, I suppose, the sort of wholesale, enabling other service providers versus the IoT business.
I think this comes back to your question earlier about the IoT business units within our organizations, respectively. And I think that within the the ecosystem, the development of IoT, we certainly all have those types of businesses or business groups that are working in that space. But as an enabler for all kinds of applications, we certainly can't be catering just to the internal business group that's IoT driven. We really need to have in our minds an approach to the marketplace at a broad level. And so in regards to I wouldn't see it as a versus in that case. I would see it more as both, both and. We want to be able to provide services to outside application service providers as well as provide capabilities to our internal groups that are developing our own applications in-house. But I think if we try to do one versus the other, that creates, at least in our minds, a tension that's not healthy. And right now, there's such a greenfield opportunity with IoT that I don't think there's any real reason to try to have to pick one or the other. I think it's really wanting to serve both.
Yeah, so sort of building the market as a whole. Yeah, that's a good point.
And in Vodafone, it's exactly the same. If there's a balance of that, it's much more working with partners through other organizations. So things like the car manufacturers, the meter providers, etc. But we also have our own branded consumer devices that we launched a couple of years ago now. So we'll do both exactly the same, but the balance will definitely be more via third parties and a smaller proportion directly.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So as a carrier, I mean, we are the pure carrier provider. So we have to make sure about our networks, platforms, in order to carry on the big data. Not only on the backbone, but also on the access networks and also access systems and the platforms to our customers to provide the IoT solutions to them. But we have noticed that most of the carriers and the wholesale operators in the world, particularly in Europe, so they divert their business from the whole carrier products to the enterprise products and the markets. So that's why the access network and the platform is getting more and more important either the wireline network or the wireless network.
Yeah. And,
So, yeah, please.
and as a sort of follow-on question from that, I mean, some of our work recently has focused on some of the IoT MVNOs and some of the players such as Twilio that are sort of now going after that IoT opportunity and providing, well, first of all, they make their tariffs public. It's a sort of self-service, automated type transactional sale of connectivity that they're offering. And potentially could, you know, pose some threat to the operator's IoT business in terms of downward pressure on connectivity pricing and so on. You know, do you see them potentially, or does the business see it more as growing the market at the moment, or is there a sort of view that they could potentially be a threat to the connectivity business in the future, or?
You know, from my perspective, I think it's survival of the fittest on these things. I think Twilio do a fantastic job. I mean, I've spent the last couple of years focused in A2P messaging activity, where Twilio have just been terrific in making it easy for organizations to embed communication in the applications that they create. And they will do the same, exactly the same thing in IoT. And that, for me, is just taking it to the market, making it easy for innovative organizations to implement IoT, their ideas. So, you know, welcome Twilio and others to doing that sort of thing. It definitely grows the market. We're doing the same with our platform, and that will work for certain segments of the market. So, you know, welcome them and others to help grow the market, definitely.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, I would concur. I mean, I think that, you know, the more players in the market at this point, the better. I think that there's always the potential in the future for there to be some conflict between a partner or a group like Twilio and something that's being built in-house within an organization like ours. But I think in general terms, that's, you know, that will shake itself out over time. But right now, I think just the more applications, the more use cases, the more ways in which people can use the devices and the applications are in place, the better.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Agree. Mehmet, any?
Actually, I agree with Andrew and Michael. Actually, so this is one of the important things to be ready for such an application. So we have already using the applications throughout mobile phones or tablets, whatever it is. So most probably, so in every week or bi-weekly, I'm downloading some applications to my mobile phones. Some of them are IoT applications probably, but I'm not aware of this. This is the real application or the easiest way to reach to my content. So this is another factor.
Yeah, but generally, sort of at the moment, there seems to be more of a positive view on these new players and creating the market. Okay, so we've got quite a few questions coming in. So if it's okay, we'll go to the audience questions. Go back to the audience questions. So, what's more important for supporting IoT growth, speed or capacity? Mehmet, you look like you want to say something there. So.
I would like to ask another question to the audience. So, what's your tolerance to wait to reach your content throughout your mobile phones? How many minutes or how many seconds can you wait? 30 seconds or one minute? So according to the statistics, the tolerance, the limit of the tolerance is 10 seconds. If you cannot reach to your content more than 10 seconds, so the people switch to this content to another one. So the delay is very important factor and the parameter for IoT. It means it is related to both speed and the capacity.
Yeah. Okay, and then I'll hand over to Andrew, but does it depend on the application as well?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely determined by the application. You know, if it's a smart meter type device, you know, whether a meter reading happens now or in 15 minutes time, it's not that critical. But if you're deploying a technology that is, you know, a part of a control system, controlling the movement of a drone or something like that, it's got to be much more real-time activity. So it completely depends on the application, and there will be the full range of those from, you know, tiny amounts of data where the focus is really about changing taking cost out of the supply chain, not bothering to go and read meters and that sort of thing, get it done automated, but it's very low bandwidth type stuff, right through to entertainment and high definition surveillance, much bigger bandwidth. And then and so that's from the bandwidth perspective. But then there's also the kind of latency issues, different applications where that will be the most determining factor. So it definitely, I agree, it depends on the applications.
Yeah. Okay. Michael, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's very application dependent. Although I would say at this stage, and I think for the long term, most of IoT will be very distributed and more of a one-to-one kind of user experience, whether you're talking about reading a meter. So I don't think raw overall holistic capacity is the bigger driver. I think it's really the speed, the interaction. Mehmet's point about how long are people willing to wait before they get frustrated to do something. That I think is a big driver of this. And I think one of the reasons that IoT is so compelling is because you can really enhance and change the dynamic of the user engagement, user experience, because of that individuality of what you're looking for to do and the application you're utilizing. So I would argue speed is a bit more of a priority than capacity, but I also agree it does depend upon the application.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Right. So we now have a question on security. I'm going to read it out, but I'll hand over to you, Michael, first, because I know that this was an area that you had some thoughts on. So IoT-enabled devices seem to be easy targets for cyber and DDoS attacks. What measures should companies take to improve security?
Yeah, so they're very easy targets in general terms. I think that when you talk about connected car, you're not talking about a dumb device in that case, but when you're talking about the cloud camera in front of my house, it's definitely a dumb device in relative terms. So that's the challenge when you talk about billions of those devices being connected. The problem is that generally speaking, the security on that device is not at the same level that a car would be or that a server in a data center would be. And so when those can be marshaled in a negative way, it has big effects. And we've seen this a number of different times over the last few years on the broader network. So from a DDoS perspective, it's a huge issue. I mean, there's probably a number of different ways in which it could be effective, but I actually think the device manufacturers themselves, more so than the networking companies, and I'm not trying to pass the buck, but I think that the actual device manufacturers could build in some things to enhance the requirements for security on those devices, even the dumb devices, and really help protect the broader network at large. And I think that will probably happen over time, but there's not really an industry mechanism within those groups, with some exceptions in the financial industry. For example, credit cards all have a certain security protocol they have to work within. So there's some in healthcare as well, but as soon as you move outside of that scope, the regulatory and or the kind of self-governing bodies within those different industries don't really put this as a priority at this point. So from our perspective, when you see, we have people using our network to get attacked at large scale, DDoS attacks, and that has impact for those businesses. That's what will trigger, I think, a better level of security within those devices over time. But there's definitely huge targets in that regard.
Yeah, yeah.
For us, it's a couple of fronts, one of which is in the network. It's adopting standards like, for example, on 5G, the GSMA has defined a standard for network security that we're adopting fully, participating in that. So it's making sure at a network level you're complying with industry standards on security. I think then, in terms of IoT, it looks very much like a traditional IT development. And it's the sort of security that you should have on an IT development that combined with the network security is what will provide the end-to-end security. I think where we can help on that as a network provider is making that kind of end-to-end security service available simply to use by third-party organizations. So we do our bit to help make developers' applications safe, but then I agree with Michael. It's also the specific devices, and then it's any specific measures that the innovators themselves want to adopt in terms of security.
Yeah, good point.
The security is a most crucial, buzzword for the operators and the providers. So we have to be sure that our services and the products having secure. So actually, the security protocols has to be in standard, as Michael says. So each of them has to communicate to and compatible to each other. So for example, once we working on the security systems or the security solutions for network, for servers, data centers, and as well as the end users' devices. So these are the these are in the different standards. So all of them has to be in connection with each other. So I remember that a couple of years ago in some countries, so the banking attractions has gotten DDoS attacks. Then the whole banking interactions were stopped in a day for a day. So this is a really critical issue to all of the providers and the vendors and the software manufacturers and for all of us, actually.
And I think you mentioned earlier the importance of the ecosystem, and I think that probably comes in quite a lot in terms of where security is concerned, and working together to ensure end-to-end security for any given IoT project. And I suppose in terms of enterprise IoT, so if we're talking about automotive or metering, presumably there's now more emphasis on security by design and building security in from the start, whereas the consumer market is probably still the Wild West.
I think it's much less defined within the consumer space in general terms. And you're also just talking about much less costly devices. I mean, you can get a camera to connect to your Wi-Fi in your house for less than $50 now, basically. So there's just not a lot of built-in security in a device that's $50.
Yeah.
It's just not. So that's part of, I think, the challenge on the device side.
So I think some guidelines were released last week for the UK market, and I think similarly in the US market there have been guidelines for device manufacturers and for IoT devices, but they're not enforced, if you like. So
And there's certainly no penalties if they don't do that.
No,
so,
exactly.
Yeah, there's no downside, really.
Yeah. Okay, and we have another question which I'll go to. With driverless cars, so we've spoken quite a bit about automotive already. With driverless cars, where does all the data get processed, and how will they access cloud services? Now, I think, I'm not sure who wants to take this first, but I think there's been quite a lot written about driverless cars, and in terms of how much or how far they will need the network for some of the data requirements that they have. Who would like to go first on that one? Anyone with?
So actually,
Mehmet.
so this is another ecosystem, participating by the software manufacturers or the applications in the driverless car, for example, in Google probably. So the municipalities and the government and the road authority or the road companies, and what else? The electricity companies or the wireless service provider companies has to be on the same platform. In order to carry on the driver's car, of course. This is another ecosystem, I believe. For example, in Turkey, so there are, if I'm not wrong, 5 to 7, participants in the consortium. But the government is the, supportive to this establishment and the forming up this consortium. Actually, so there are some applications in the United States as well as in Hong Kong, if I'm not wrong, and also China. So this is a very crucial thing from the security point of view. Seamless, connectivity between the servers and the control center, or of course there has to be some control center or network operation center, some other things to make sure about everything is in the right track for the driverless car. So that's another ecosystem.
Yeah.
The short answer to the question is data gets processed everywhere. Some of it gets processed on board, on the car. Some of it gets processed in the cloud. It depends on what part of the data that is being acted upon, but it gets processed in all places. I don't think that will change. It'll just get a broader set of cloud-based services. And I think ultimately the interaction between other devices in the close proximity is going to become part of the issue with driverless cars and how they manage that interactivity piece. So, but it's processed in numerous places as part of a driverless car, the testing that's going on right now.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Okay, so we have a couple more minutes. I thought, right, we have another question from the audience, so let's take that. Oh, no? I just had one last question, really, and that's the role of 5G in IoT. So obviously, their IoT or massive IoT is seen as an opportunity and a reason for 5G networks in the future. Although there are some question marks over that, because a lot of the sort of low power, wide area networks that are being rolled out now seem to be sufficient for meeting the requirements of a large number of applications. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on where you see the role of 5G in IoT further down the line. Andrew, please.
Yeah, for us, it goes back to the issue of matching applications to particular access mechanisms. And the two examples that we're working on heavily are about high definition surveillance and entertainment in use of 5G. So things that need, that high bandwidth and density of high bandwidth in a small area. The bit for us, one of the areas, as I mentioned, that we're focusing on is in car entertainment. And there, just linking it back to the carrier community again, that breadth of coverage, that geographic reach of coverage is really important. So if you're a car manufacturer, you want to be able to manufacture that car once. We work with a lot of the German car manufacturers, but they want to manufacture a BMW in Germany and ship it across the world. And it's got to work. And so for us, if it's got a Vodafone SIM-in supporting IoT, it's that roaming agreement that we have right across the globe that enables it to work and fit for the manufacturer. So, wherever 4G is, your BMW will work to its optimum with that sort of entertainment capability in it. So.
Great. So entertainment, in-car entertainment. Michael? No?
Yeah, to the example of we've talked about the automotive applications, but it is safe to say that there aren't any automotive applications being developed where you're using a fixed connection for the ability to use IoT. So I think when you talk about 5G, the mobility component of that obviously is pretty huge, along with the capacity that's involved. And I think, is it required? It's not today. We're doing any number of things without it. 5G in that sense, but will it create lots of new opportunities? It definitely will. And history tells us that as capacity and bandwidth are more available, whether it's last mile, whether it's just in broad scale scope, it creates a lot of new applications that people either haven't been able to do or haven't even thought of doing because that capability didn't exist. Yeah. So it's not required, but it certainly is going to enhance and expand the opportunities that will come up in the applications that will get developed, the innovation that will come along because of that mobility component and the bandwidth itself.
Yeah, an important point, I think, about enhancing the current way we do things. Yeah. And Mehmet.
On top of that, according to me, the customer experience. and the feedback from the customers, because we have to consider all of the, feedbacks from our customers, because we have to fulfill their requirements. We are providing the services, IoT services, whatever it is, and all of our products we are providing to our corporate and the individual customers. So if anything goes wrong, so it's going to be, negative. It's going to be getting back to as a negative impact. So that's why the customer experience is another important parameter for the IoT applications trend.
Yeah.
So in some cases, the customers or the end users give up to use any of the customers, any of the applications, if they face some misoperations or misusage. So that's why you have to understand your customer requirements and also the customer needs, definitely.
Okay.
So Steve Jobs says that. So without serving the breakthrough to the people, you cannot understand what they are requiring, what their needs.
Okay, good point. So meeting customer requirements. So the question came back in, so I'm going to ask the last audience question before we finish. So the biggest threat to IoT growth, what is it? Are there any threats to this coming from the network? So Andrew, would you like to start?
We do a regular IoT barometer survey and ask companies what is the sort of biggest impediment to their adoption of IoT. And what that comes back is, first of all, I guess 60% or more of customers say there aren't really any significant impediments. But of those that do, the other 40% or so, there's about 35% that are talking about security and the concerns about security. So that's the area to focus on, and that really dwarfs the next most significant item, which is about the cost of adoption of IoT. So security is the biggest concern. So it's really only 35% of 40%. So around about 15% of organisations that are concerned about their adoption. But of course, every organisation that does have some sort of security breach, 100% of those do find it a huge issue. So, but that's the biggest impediment that we find to growth.
So security, and then much lower down the list, cost.
Cost, yeah.
Okay. Michael?
Yeah, those are the exact answers. I mean, security is probably the biggest threat inherently, just based upon how the IoT is structured and how it works. So, but yeah, I think ultimately time and money. So cost is not just dollars or pounds or euros, but it's also, I think, the time that companies have to invest in developing applications, rolling them out. So those two things are also drivers. But I think ultimately, I would have said 2 years ago that probably IoT's biggest threat is not living up to the hype. But at this point, I think that's proven itself to not be a problem. There are, continuously new applications, continuously new ways in which IoT is being used. But 2 years ago is such a buzzword, and there weren't a lot of real tangible evidences yet to it.
Points.
I think that's kind of played itself out. So that's, I think security is certainly the biggest threat that exists.
Good. Mehmet?
Yeah, security is, crucial point for the IoTs and the platforms. One other thing might be the regulations in respective countries. So we have some experience in some of the countries. I do not want to give the name of that countries. So once we transfer your know-how or any consultancy or any products to that country, so you hit the regulations in respective countries. So that's why the government and the regulatory bodies and the other authorities have to be proactive in order to take action for the innovations like IoT, like other applications or some other thing.
Yeah.
But in Europe, so it's not, and in Northern America, it's not the case. But for the other countries in certain continents, so this is the big issue.
No, good point. So I think number one, it's security, but two, much lower down the list is cost, but also along with regulation when you want to export that IoT solution or product to another country, there may be different regulatory regime that you have to take into account. Great, okay. Well, I think I'd like to thank the panelists very much for answering all of my questions and your questions. And thank you very much for joining the session.
Thank you.